Hello, thank you for joining me on this short video, Food Contaminants. My name is Andy Bowles and I'm a food lawyer. Now you may be watching this video as part of our online training service. This is number 6 in a series of 100 videos on UK food law topics I'm recording. And if you're watching it on our online service, you'll have access to some additional resources as well as a webinar which is about an hour long, goes into a little bit more depth on the subject that I'm talking about. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, well, of course, you're very welcome. Okay, so what are food contaminants? Well, it's actually quite a detailed definition there taken from law. It's very small writing, so you won't be able to read it. So I'm just going to summarize it first of all. A food contaminant is a substance that's not intended to be present in a food, but can be there as a result of production. Now, what do I mean by production? Well, production includes the very beginning, the primary production of food, so animal husbandry. So, for example, you may get contaminants that are introduced through the use of veterinary medicines. It could be a contaminant that's introduced by the harvesting and storage of cereals. So we go through the primary production, the farming end of production, if you like. But it could happen during manufacturing, processing, preparation, treatment, packaging, transport. It could be as a result of environmental contamination. The important thing is that when I'm talking about contaminants here, I'm not talking about foreign bodies, foreign matter, extraneous matter, bits that might fall off the ceiling. That's not what I'm talking about, food contaminants. I'm talking about these substances that may be incorporated in the food during the production of that food. So I said there's basically 3 types of food contaminant. There's an agricultural contaminant. Now an example of that would be mycotoxins. Mycotoxins, there's another video on mycotoxins because they're pretty important in food law, but they're toxins produced by molds, fungi, so molds particularly. Things like Penicillium, Aspergillus species. If you've got, for example, some grains, cereals or something, and you've harvested them and you've stored them inappropriately, maybe it's a bit too moist, a bit too warm, then of course they might be subject to mold growth. And the way mold will grow on things like cereals or peanuts or other nuts is that they will produce these little hyphae, these little tendrils that will penetrate into the cereal. In order to extract the nutrients that the mold needs, it will excrete chemicals. These chemicals are perfectly normal for the mold, but unfortunately may be toxic to humans, and they're known as mycotoxins. So in other words, fungal poisons. So that's an example of an environment or an agricultural contaminant. Industrial contaminants might be incorporated during the manufacture of a food, like MCPD, or it might be something like metal, for example, tin, that's taken up during the process. Environmental contaminants, well, we have some pretty nasty ones out there and pretty famous ones. I mean, dioxin can be produced by, burning waste and things like that in the atmosphere, so it can be an atmospheric contaminant. You could have things like heavy metals present, again, as a result of industrial processes in the neighbourhood or heavy traffic in the locality, that sort of thing. So you can see that with food contaminants, they're not intended to be present in food. We obviously need to take steps to prevent them, but we live in an imperfect world, so the law recognises that foods cannot necessarily be contaminant free. What the law requires is that contaminants should only ever be present in levels as low as reasonably achieved. So food business operators are required to take steps with respect to contaminants to make sure that any contaminants that might be present are as this ALARA level, as low as reasonably achievable. So we'll see in a moment the law sets some maximum levels, and of course you can't exceed the levels of stated contaminants. But even if maximum levels are not met, food businesses must put in steps to make sure the contaminants are at this ALARA level. So what sort of regulations apply here? We have contaminants in food regulations, and there are some general principles. And basically the general rule is foods must not be placed on the market if the contaminant levels exceed those stated in the regulations. You have annexes to the regulations which list out foods, list out contaminants, and list out maximum levels. But remember, these are not targets. These are maximum, and irrespective of the maximum level, measures should be taken to ensure the contaminant is at a low as reasonably achievable level. What sorts of standards are set? In the regulations, we have set standards on things like nitrates, which is an agricultural contaminant. Nitrates might be present in things like lettuces, for example, come from fertilizers and whatnot. Mycotoxins, another agricultural one I've already talked about. Metals, which can be agricultural, can be industrial, it sort of can be all over the place, environmental. MCPD, dioxins, PARs, that's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, complex hydrocarbons. Melamine, inherent plant toxins. So, foods that have those contaminants exceeding the maximum level should not be used. They should not be used as ingredients. But as a general principle, if a food exceeds those levels, you can't just add a food to it to dilute it down. So if you've got some nuts contaminated with mycotoxin, you can't just add a whole load of nuts that aren't contaminated to dilute the contaminant. Dilution of contaminants is prohibited in law, but you can do things, and typically with contaminants, the controls for contaminants might involve sorting. So if you have, for example, peanuts contaminated with mycotoxins, they could be sorted to remove the ones that are moldy. That might help to reduce down the levels. So you're not diluting them, you're just removing the contamination. And you can treat them. I mean, mycotoxins don't permit the use of chemicals in treatment, but there are some blanching, steam treatments that might be available to reduce down the levels of contamination. There we are, that's a very short video on food contaminants. If you'd like to know more, then please sign up to our online training service available on our website. Thank you for listening. That was just one video out of a series of 100. Please join me on 99 of the others. Thanks very much. Cheers.